Hey listeners, if you've been listening to our show, chances are you've heard the wonderful contributions of our favorite Tolkien scholar, Marilyn R. Pukila. Marilyn just launched her own podcast on our network called Rings and Rituals.
Join me and Dr. Sarah Brown on our journey through the Lord of the Rings of Power, through the lens of ritual. Episodes drop every other Wednesday on the Rings and Rituals feed, linked in the show notes. See you there.
Oneshot podcast, where the Lorehounds, your guides to the end of democracy as we know it. I'm David, and here with me today are Anthony and Ron for our coverage of the A24 movie Civil War. We're going to start off with a few production details, and then we'll get into our spoiler-free hot takes. We'll take a short break, and then after that, we'll get into a more detailed conversation about the plot, the characters, the themes that are presented in the movie, followed by a little bit of listener feedback. If you want to get in touch with us, there's a couple of options. You can send emails to lorehounds@thelorehounds.com or head over to our website, and there's a voicemail feature that you can record yourself and we can drop those straight into podcasts, or there's a contact form. You can just fill that out, send us your comments. If you are interested in supporting what we do as a Lorehounds community and supporting our co-creators and all the different projects that we've got going on, check us out at Supercast or on Patreon. Supercast is like Patreon, but it's a little bit better geared for podcasters. There's links to all platforms in the show notes, and subscribers get ad-free episodes and all that other kind of good stuff. I'll talk about a bit more of that at the end of the podcast. Also, an invitation to join us on our Discord. We've got a pretty fun and active community, great moderator team, different channels set up for all the different conversations that we've got going on. But I would like to get straight into it. So first off, Ron, welcome back. Good to see you. You've decided to join. We've invited you and you've accepted to join our little club as a co-host in the Lorehounds community. Welcome.
Yeah.
And thanks.
Welcome to the resistance.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Love your perspectives and just so glad that we can sort of kick it around together.
Yeah, me too.
Anthony, welcome back. Always good to see you as well. You've
Always
been busy?
good to see you. Yeah, we're in the middle of our Felonies and Fugazis season of Properly Howard. This week, we're putting out Shakedown, which is a movie that I have not seen before. It is bonkers.
Is it?
It is. Sam Elliott does his best Jackie Chan movie. So it's pretty amazing, actually.
See Sam Elliott kicking ass. With, what's his name from RoboCop? Peter
Weller. That's
Peter
right.
Weller. That's it. Yeah. All right. For this one shot, I have kind of put together a new template, and I wanted to try to bring some consistency across our movie coverage, just make it a little bit easier for us to jump in and prepare, as well as to provide some basic, so listeners can understand how we're going to progress and sort of what we're going to talk about. So if you like the new format, let me know, drop a note in the Discord or send us an email or something like that. But hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier for us to turn and burn on some of these movies and stuff. So real quick up top, little plot synopsis. If you haven't seen the movie Civil War already, in a dystopian future America, a team of journalists races against time to reach Washington, D.C. before rebel factions descend upon the White House. It was written, directed by Alex Garland and distributed by A24. It stars Kristen Dunst, Wagner Moura, Kaylee Spianey, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, and Stephen McKinley Henderson. We'll talk about more of them once we get into the details. Nick Offerman is here for a very short little cameo bit. The box office, the budget was about 50 to 60 million. And so far at the time of the recording, it had a $25 million opening weekend, and it's hitting 48 million worldwide. So it's on track to be a good movie for them. It's gotten some mixed reviews in the ratings and review world. On Rotten Tomato, It's holding an 80 to 74 critic over user scores. And on Metacritic, the critics are giving it 75 and a user rating of 6.1. So I think a lot of people are enjoying it, but then there's a definite group of people who are not into the film as much as the others are. So let's kick it off, Ron. What did you think of this movie in general? Sort of spoiler free, your big hot takes.
Yeah. First, I just want to say, in my head canon, Nick is actually Ron from Parks and Rec, and he has gone out the political ladder to become. So I'll just throw that out there because I don't know if they actually say the president's name in the movie. So
they do not. They just call him the president. So it's absolutely Ron Swanson.
That's right,
President Swanson.
There's enough similarity where it could be for sure. Hot takes. I remember when I first saw this trailer. Unlike most people, I was like, "Oh, this movie is made for me." This movie is made for me, just because I kind of feel like we're heading in that direction in a lot of ways, and so I was looking forward to seeing it. And we won't get in. I mean, I'm sure we'll dive more into spoilers about sort of like what transpires. But in a way, I was pleasantly surprised in terms of how it transpired the way it did. And we can talk more about that in spoilers. I felt like it was gripping. The acting, of course, was amazing. The Jesse Plemons is just he. I mean, you see him in the trailer, so you have an idea of the kind of character he is. The first time I ever saw him was in Breaking Bad, and he plays these kind of characters very well. I'll just say that. But then again, when you think about him in Game Night, or even in Fargo, he has a little bit of a disposition. So he's love his range, and he did well. Everyone in this was really good. So if you haven't seen it yet, if you get a chance to see it on a screen.
We'll talk about that in a second. I got a little new section.
Oh, okay.
For that.
Yeah. So those are my.
I see a note in here in the outline that you said about the California Texas thing.
And because everyone is saying, and this isn't spoiler, so I won't break into it, but because this is a discussion that people were having from the trailer. Well, how did Texas and California? Because you realize from the trailer that Texas and California are the two states that are
the Western
the
Alliance
states. Yeah, who are fighting against the U.S. And people are wondering, well, how could these two states? How could these two states
band together?
And my thought on that was, I felt like that was both a lack of imagination among people and a lack of history of knowledge. As I mentioned in the Discord when we were talking about this, at one time the United States and Russia were allies, and at one time, Japan and Italy were enemies. I mean, enemies to us. And so, when you think about the divide between our country and those countries back then, the divide between California and Texas now pales in comparison. So, it doesn't take more than a generation for things to flip. So that's one thing. Also, a lot of people are moving from California to Texas just because the prices here are crazy.
You're in the LA area,
right? I saw on some other show or podcast, someone in the Midwest, they were talking about the pricing, and they were complaining about like how some house was costing like $300,000 or $400,000. And it was like and they were complaining about how expensive it was. Like you can't even, I don't think you even get a plot of land for that much. Where I am.
The LA
so
area.
It's just crazy. Now, everyone who's moving to California and they're moving to Austin, I think I was just there for South by Southwest a month or so ago, and you can see the results. But I can foresee a future where a lot of Californians have moved to Texas, and now it's become more purple than red, and And
I mean,
frankly,
if you
there's
think
a lot
about
of,
it, Texas is trending purple in the urban areas, and California probably has more red state voters than most red states. So it
absolutely. I was
wouldn't
just going
take
to say that.
it wouldn't take much for those two, and of course, both of those states have been talking about seceding from the union for in Texas's history since the very beginning, right?
Right, right, yeah.
So I don't know. That didn't really. That's a little bit of a head scratcher. The Texas California alliance, but I think it's an intentional one. I think Alex Garland is basically saying, you know what, these two are not that different if you think about it.
I agree.
And like you said, it could just take a couple decades for things to shift.
I'd also just jump in on the bandwagon here on the Texas California thing, which is I think it's an interesting Rorschach test, and you can really gauge somebody's thoughts about history and modern politics based on how they react to this question of California, Texas. So I think that's an interesting point. The other thing I would say is to prosecute a war on this scale, where you've got fighters and helicopters and men and material. That's an old way of saying it, but of soldiers and the materials you need. Think of the number of rounds of ammunition that were expended during the one battle scene, or the two of the big battle scenes that we see. You have to have enormous manufacturing capabilities to prosecute a war of this scale and this intensity, a hot war at this intensity. So both California and Texas have huge economies that they could, quote unquote, nationalize to put towards the war effort. So they've got the infrastructure, they've got the materials and things like that. So, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting question about whether or not you could see that, and what that tells me about you if I'm having that conversation with you. I think it's an interesting illumination. Anthony, hot takes for Civil War. What'd you think?
I was a little bit anxious about this movie. Like, I thought, for a lot of the same reasons Ron said, like, this movie was like, this feels very timely because of the state of our political discourse and social discourse. And I thought, oh no, I don't know if this maybe it's too close to home for me. But after seeing it, I can appreciate that the director has a different take on maybe the futility of the discourse. I didn't know that he had intended this as an anti-war film going in. And I thought it was, I thought that this movie was intending to problematize the current state of affairs rather than just kind of create a dystopia about it. And I really enjoyed this movie, and I didn't think I would. So my hot take is I liked it.
Okay. I thought it was a really good movie too. I enjoyed it. If you separate out the politics and you just look at it as a movie, as a war movie, as a journalism war movie, I enjoyed the hell out of it. I thought the visual design, the sound design, the needle drops, all of that worked really well. The characters were interesting and compelling. The nail-biting moments were terrifying at times, but the movie never got bogged down in any of those situations or scenes. It's a road movie, right? It's a great American road movie. Let's do Route 66 or whatever. They're on the road, they're having these encounters, and they reach their objective. It's a tidy film too. An hour 38, something like that. So it has a great pace, but I never felt. I was really transported by it. There's a lot of conversation I've seen about, like, what's the point of this movie? What is Alex Garland trying to say? And I think, again, just, it's a war movie, right? So there's that. And as you say, it's an anti-war movie. And I think for me, the big takeaway is what's kept us out of that morass that a lot of countries around the world have experienced is not that much. It's pretty thin. And of all the kinds of wars that you can have, I think civil wars, and we've had one, and we're still dealing with the outcomes of that war, resolved and unresolved. That civil wars are the worst kinds of wars, because I think, without going into that one scene, there's the whole question of what kind of American are you? That's one of the questions that Alex Garland poses us, and I think that's I think it's timely, and I'm glad that this movie is not political in the sense of, oh, well, how did they get there? They're just dealing with the question as is. We're dropped in media res, as I guess they say, right? Where there's just nothing. We're there with them. It's going. And I really, really like that. I too was worried when I first saw the trailers. I don't know if either of you saw Natural Born Killers.
Yeah, when it came out a long time ago.
I was actually scared in the theater that I was going to get murdered before the movie was over, because of the way that movie rolls out and what it does. When I walked out of this movie, I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like, I had no anxiety anymore that this was some sort of fuel on the fire of our current political situation in our country. And in fact, I think it does a good service in terms of reminding us that for our democracy to be a democracy, we need to work. Like, we as a voting and being educated and all that kind of stuff. Not getting political specifically, but the fact that it could happen here. Yes, it could happen here. It would take some extraordinary circumstances, a third term of a president or something like that, but it could happen, and so I think it's a good warning. And the last thing I wanted to think about, I know there's been some conversation about, does this accurately depict journalism and journalists in specific? And I actually I dabbled in photojournalism, freelance photojournalism, in another incarnation of my life. And I've covered demonstrations. I had a good buddy of mine in Athens get his arm broken by the cops when they beat him. Another good friend of mine got a rock in the side of the face when he was in Tahrir Square in Cairo and lost some teeth. That same guy got thrown off a wall during January 6th. He was covering the insurrection there, and a bunch of J6ers grabbed him and threw him over a wall. He's fine. So, what photojournalists and journalists and video written and photojournalists all have to deal with at times is very scary, but there's also an exhilaration to it, and there's also an adrenaline. And so I thought that the movie, I think there's a question that's been brought up. Marilyn brought this up in our Discord, is this an accurate depiction of journalism and photojournalists? And I would say it's a stylized, accurate portrayal of what people do and what motivates them and what they sort of get up to in these types of situations. Let me
ask you really quick
didn't
here.
ring false for me. Yeah.
Okay, so it didn't ring false, but I'm wondering, as someone who has a better insight into that world than I do,
yeah,
do you feel like this film gave you a positive portrayal of journalists, or like without getting into spoilers, maybe we should get into spoilers
very soon here. Yeah, we're almost there.
Okay,
we can talk about our.
Do you feel like the protagonists of this film were anti-heroes at their core, or do you feel like they were heroic at their core?
That's a good question. I think that it portrayed the realism of being a modern day journalist and a conflict journalist specifically, where. Okay, so when we come back from the break, we got a couple little bit more things, but we can just pick this theme up right away.
Okay.
Because it's hard to talk about outside of the context of the individual scenes. And again, I'll just reiterate that it's stylized and it is compressed. The portrayals are compressed because we have an hour 38 to get to know these people and live with them. But that compression and that stylization didn't send me any false representations, signals of what it is to be a conflict journalist. So.
Interesting.
I wanted to follow up on your comment about the conversations people are having regarding like what is the movie about?
Yeah.
So something like those lines. And I think a lot of that comes out of an expectation that people have going in, and that expectation not necessarily being met. Because if you go in thinking or expecting one thing or looking for one thing, it can make it easy for you to miss the thing that it is actually about. Because I do think he is saying something. And Garland is good for creating movies with endings that leave you having conversations. You know, I think about the end of Ex Machina, you know. And so this is something that he does. And so I don't think that's necessarily out of the ordinary for the kind of filmmaker he is. But on top of that, I do think there are some specific things that are being said in here. You think about the decisions that some people make and how they go about doing the things that they do. And I think about just the Wagner Moura character. I never know if it's Wagner Moura or Wagner Moura. I want to say Wagner Moura.
It's more
like
it's got a little zhuzh to it.
Yeah. Anyway, so when I think about those characters, I think there are some specific things that Garland
does,
whether overtly or covertly, he is saying.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't come away with the film feeling like, oh, that movie wasn't about anything other than, you know, war sucks, which obviously
and Civil War sucks even more.
Civil War sucks even more, right? But yeah, I think there are definitely some specific themes he's saying he's tackling, and right when we dive more into some of the specifics of the movie, we can talk about what those are.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick, do you guys recommend seeing this in a theater or waiting for streaming?
If you could see it in a theater, I would see it in a theater. I think the sound design is such that the best sound system you can get at the theater, there's enough on the screen to even warrant a large screen. I didn't see it in IMAX. But the screen I saw it on was kind of big, and I definitely added to it. That being said, if you get a chance to see it, see it. I mean, I think the kinds of conversations you're going to have around it and the kind of thing you take away from it, you can still get those things even if you watch it on something smaller. But if you have an opportunity to see it on the screen, I would.
Do you concur, Anthony?
Yeah, I would recommend seeing it on a screen. I would not recommend seeing it with my 16-year-old son. So yes, theater, do not see it the way I saw it.
There was someone in our row who had their kid, and their kid could not have been more than 6.
Oh, wow.
No.
Oh, no.
And the trailers for this movie, I'm not a horror guy. One of the trailers was a horror film. I had to close my eyes through the trailer for one of the movies.
What was the trailer? That's actually one of our section, trailers of note, in terms of our theater experience.
Honestly.
You don't remember now? Okay.
I don't remember.
I concur that this is
my eyes are closed, so that's probably why I don't
you did. This is a big screen movie with a good sound system. Absolutely, if you can. It's an amazing. The music is amazing. The sound design is amazing. The visuals are really good, and I think it works better on a bigger screen. I saw it in a late night show. The theater was nearly empty. It wasn't a great sound system. We don't have a great high end sound system screen in our little town. We've got a good screen, but it's not a great screen. I do have one small rant though, and I don't know if this is directed at generations younger than me or not, but y'all need to stop talking in movie theaters because it's really annoying. The last 3 movies I've gone to, 2 of them were Dune. People behind me were talking in the movie, and I actually moved at one point.
It depends on the movie. I think it depends on the movie. Like if I was going to go to like a Rocky Horror Picture Show,
that's an entirely different. Yes,
I would expect a more sort of interactive experience, but
that's a movie.
I could see like a movie like this.
Yeah,
I could see why how that could be.
Or Dune. One of the times I saw Dune, a couple, and one of the couples was, I think, explaining the movie to the other person during that, and I just got up and moved far away from them. So,
Sure.
So any trailers of note? I saw Bad Boys 2, and that was the only trailer that we had, and I am not going to see that movie. It seemed like two old guys. It just seemed like a cynical cash grab trying to.
I thought they already had Bad Boys 2.
It's a whatever the next iteration of
Okay.
maybe it's Bad Boys 3.
Yeah, right.
Or 4. I mean, does it really matter?
Right.
Doesn't really matter. No.
That's true.
I saw the new trailer for
Deadpool Wolverine.
That's right. Deadpool versus Wolverine. Now that I think it has potential. I think I'm always up for a little bit of spicy humor thrown into my MCU.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So and
This will be spicy.
I did enjoy those other Deadpool movies.
Yeah. Deadpool Wolverine, otherwise known as the MCU Messiah.
It's our one big, lots of writing on MCU this year.
Yeah.
All right, next section is just a real quick analytics check-in. We've got several scales and things that we use around the Lorehounds. We have the Pukila scale, which measures relative violence. We have the Sanderson sliders, which is inspiration versus adaptation. We have the Lopez test, which measures against a known IP. Does it fit within the IP that it, if it's an adaptation of some kind? And then the Shippey test, which is, does the medium and the message, do they balance the original message of the author if it's an adapted work? I think the only one that applies right here is the Pukila scale. If Rings of Power is a 0,
Mm-hmm.
I gave it a +2 on the violence scale. I don't know where you guys, how violent was this relative to your sensibilities?
I mean, it's
Psychological as well as physical.
Yeah, sure. Is it a scale of like 1 to 10 type of thing? Or is
it is a pretty loose scale. So if you just think of, a lot of people are rating, are you watching Shogun?
Yes.
A lot of people are rating Shogun in the 3, 4, 5 range.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's all the seppuku scenes.
Yeah, and there's some other things.
There's some battles.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see this one maybe being a 3.
Okay.
Like when I think about it, there are a few concentrated. Or well, see, if we're talking about psychological. See, there are a few concentrated violent scenes, and the violent scenes you see are pretty disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I could probably give it.
There's
a
like
4.
3 key scenes where I could think of
Yeah.
where it's a little bit disturbing.
3 sounds good to me. I think sometimes the movie is stylized and sometimes it's going for like a hyper realism.
Mm-hmm.
And in the scenes where they're going for the hyper realism, they do not shy away from, spurting blood and
right.
So, and it's a war movie. So
yeah, and they depict war,
and it's trying to show how ugly war can be. So, of course, I mean, it has to be a part of it. I think that it would be a very odd war movie to not show those kinds of gory scenes.
Right.
So yeah, I think 3 works pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would not say as a war movie, it's on the same level of violence, for instance, that you would see like in the opening of Saving Private Ryan.
Right. Which is much higher scale. And which is interesting for a World War II movie, that depicts a lot of intense violence, or the impact of violence, the impact of being, shot. Whereas I watched a lot of World War II movies as a kid, Saturday matinee TV stuff.
Yeah, me too.
And it's pretty sanitized. And I remember seeing Cross of Iron for the first time and being shocked at the depiction of violence and how horrible it was, as opposed to, we just, open up and we kill a bunch of Nazis and, they just all kind of crumple to the ground. As opposed
that
to
was one of my big takeaways from Saving Private Ryan was how violent. I never thought of World War II. Funny, same thing. Like I remember seeing The Longest Day as a kid. We watched it in school, and I remember thinking after I saw Saving Private Ryan, wow, I didn't know World War II was so violent.
There you
Which
go.
is funny when you think about it, but it's media has a way of
Yeah. And I think maybe
advancing
that's what
it.
Garland is trying to do with this movie in
Yeah.
some degree, right? And what we've talked about. Okay, cool. Well, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we'll start to talk about spoilers. We're going to get into themes, plot and story, character, and we're going to start taking it apart in a little bit more detailed way. So we'll be right back.
Hey listeners, Aaron here. If you're watching Fallout on Amazon Prime Video, then we have just the podcast for you. Radioactive Ramblings has joined the Lorehounds network. We are going to be breaking down the show episode by episode, making far-fetched theories, and dropping some tidbits of lore. If you want to hear us ramble, tune into Radioactive Ramblings, linked in the show notes. We hope to have you join us in the wasteland.
All right, and we are back. So, Anthony, before the break, we started to talk a little bit about one of the themes of journalism in this movie. What was your thought? Let's pick it up a little bit further.
I think that going into the film, I thought, oh, these journalists are just as brave as anyone else in this film. I mean, you're walking into a battle scene without a gun, basically.
Right. You're
doing it for the good of the, public knowledge, the shared discourse of truth, and so there's sort of this higher altruism part of it. And then when I left the film, I thought, no, these people are thrill-seeking assholes.
Right.
And if you do try to be a human, try to act upon like human compassion instead of doing your job, you're going to get killed. We've got two examples in the film of a journalist deciding to make a human decision rather than a journalistic decision. Both those people will get killed.
Right.
And I think eventually you find out the Wagner Morna character. What's his name? Joel. Joel's just a horrible person across the board. And he's the one that's sort of the most thrill-seeking, the most attracted to violence and his own gratification than the others. So I'm conflicted. I still think that it does portray heroic moments of these journalists. I think at the end of the day, if I walk away from the film, I don't think that these people are helping anything at all. And there's a couple of scenes that I could point to, but before I do, I'll throw it to you guys.
Well, I was going to say the Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, has that moment when she's talking to Sammy, the McKinley Henderson character, where they're watching the tracer fire off in the distance when they had their sort of first night in the bush. Right. And she says, every time I took a picture, I thought I was sending home a message that this could, this is a warning message, right? Or I think of when Wagner Moura's, running in once they've got the president at gunpoint, and he's like, wait. And you think, oh, is he going to give some sort of moral speech? You can't kill him. You have to put him on trial. He's like, I need a quote. Right. And so, he's going for his selfish.
Well, it's not just that. To me, it's like, I need a quote. And the quote was, don't let them kill me. I mean, I feel like as a journalist, you got this captive, literally a captive moment. I would want to know something about the motivation of this grand villain. Why did you do this? What was your motivation for? I would want to know something.
Why did you stay third term?
Right. At the end of the day, it was sort of like, no, we want to portray you as cowardly in the end. And you chose to give me a cowardly quote, and that'll do. So I don't know. I mean, I felt like there was a few moments, and the one that really got me was when they would go into that little town where all the citizens are pretending like there's no war happening.
Right.
And the girl behind the counter basically says, well, I've been watching the news. Just seems like it'd be a good idea to stay out of it. And to me, that was the biggest commentary of the entire film, because here these journalists think that they're doing a service to the nation.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't
by
even think about the
recording
journalism.
this.
Yeah.
But in reality, you could watch the news and see all those images and decide to just, duck out and, take a different view on this at the end of the day. So the journalists what they're doing doesn't matter. In the world of the film, that girl behind the counter shows what those photojournalists are doing.
Damn, that's a really good
Ultimately
point.
doesn't really matter.
Ron, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts regarding the way Wagner Moura's character Joel responds to having a president right there and being able to interview him or to find out more. I get the impression from the movie, the context of the movie, that this dude, he disbands the FBI. He gives himself a third term. He's a wannabe dictator. He's based on the kind of things he's saying at the opening of the film.
That was a really great opening sequence too, with the government just sort of rehearsing his speech,
right,
as a way to bring you in. Is this a good guy, a bad guy? Yeah,
and it's right, and it's obviously a speech that's not based on reality. So he's someone who likes to lie. So he's a lying wannabe despot.
Oh, that's a really good point.
A lying wannabe despot dictator who has, killed U.S. civilians. I think it's the kind of person where they already know the answers to those questions. They know the kind of person he is. They know why he's doing it. Right. They don't need to have a sit down, long conversation with him. And I can think of some politicians who are kind of like that, who people probably wouldn't need to interview to find out like what they think or what they're like. And so, but what got me about Joel's character was, and I'm trying to figure out, because when you see his reaction to his two buddies being killed, like
Tony
that scene
Bohai.
where he's screaming and you don't hear it, but you can just see it. But when Lee gets killed, no reaction. And I think it's because he's caught up in the moment. Like we got
a job to do. Yeah, we got a job
to do. So maybe that's it in the moment. He just went into that mode. But that contrast between his reaction to seeing his buddies killed, and I think that speaks to his nature in some aspects. But I could understand why he said what he said with regards to, because again, like, what's it going to do? Because we know that the other people, we know that he's going to be summarily executed, and I don't know that I don't know that anything else. I almost feel like that quote, even from a journalistic point of view, if he's the kind of person that the movie seems to paint that he is, that maybe that is a better quote for his legacy.
I think that you might have turned me around on this. I think at the end of the day, if the journalist's job is to get to the human and not the facade, that was a very human moment.
For sure. Yeah.
If the president had said something like, God bless America or something like that, it would be like, okay, no, I just see the facade. I need to keep asking questions until I get behind this so people can see the human behind the facade.
Right.
But I guess, don't let them kill me. That is the most visceral human response in that moment. So maybe the journalists just didn't have to work that hard because the soldiers did all the work for him.
I think when you look back at the conversation that they had in the hotel after the suicide bombing, and then there's another conversation when they're in the vehicle in the early stage. I can't remember if it was before or after the car wash. They're thinking about the question, like, what are you going to ask him? What is the story?
Right. Yeah.
The story isn't the front line. There's only one story left, and that is the guy in the White House.
Yeah. What are the motivations of the president? Which, by the way, we should note, I think it's an intention that the president is not named, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
So
and I think that I think Alex Garland is intentionally setting us up. And something you said, Ron, too, at the beginning, that I think both you guys watched Fargo, and I know Ron, you enjoyed the last season. I'm not sure. Anthony, you're a Fargo fan, aren't you?
Yeah,
the TV
yeah.
show. That they always start the show off with these events are true, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent. So immediately he's setting you up with a lie to put you into a place of reflection about the fiction that the story that we're about to do. And so the president's speech at the beginning sets up this fiction that, and it's a very modeled speech. Like we know the kind of politician that is being winked at here. But it sets us up for this fiction. And then when you have Wagner Moura saying like there's only one story here, and that's the fall of the White House, that this is this idea that these journalists are trying to get to some kind of truth in the moment. And they're trying to find something out. And that is their job. That's the job that they see that they have. And then reflecting on from my own personal experience, I did this for a short while. I've known a few other real photojournalists. I mostly hung with the photojournalism crowd because that was my thing. And I will say that it is, Anthony, to your earlier question about whether they're the morality of these characters, it is absolutely a mixed thing. I can remember some situations of myself. Like I was in Athens and we were covering a really violent riot over the death of this young boy who had been shot by some police. And every year on his death, they would have big demonstrations in downtown Athens. And one of the things that they had in Greece at the time was a law protecting the campus grounds. So protesters could run back onto a campus grounds, and the police and the military were prohibited from entering those grounds unless they had specific permission by specific authorities within the college. And it was very protected. They've since changed the law because it was this thing where people could, run back in and avoid arrest. But I was hanging out with the cops, and we were outside of this area, and they would come out from the grounds and then go back in, and it was exhilarating as all hell. And to be embedded on that side of things, and stones were coming at us, there's tear gas, the lasers, and I was staying with a friend of mine, the same friend of mine who got his arm broken at a different year because this went on multiple years around the same time. You'd come home with the flashbangs ringing in your ear, and your clothes stink of tear gas, and you've been running on your feet all day, and you've barely had anything to eat or drink, and you just never felt more alive. It was just an incredible high. And so it takes a lot of ego to chase a story like I'm going to photograph the president, or I'm going to interview the president. And so it does take a strength of ego, and it takes an egoism, being egotistical, being selfish in a way, protecting your story from another journalist.
Well, the journalist in this movie,
when the woman goes, we're just trying to stay out of it, right? So they're completely, like you pointed out earlier, are they fulfilling their mission or not? Anyway,
yeah.
You were saying.
I feel like in this movie, and I don't know if this maps onto your experience or not, but in this movie, it's not just that there's ego. I mean, there's certainly that, but it's a thrill ride.
Absolutely.
It's like
absolutely it is.
There's almost like an addictive quality to it.
There is. It's not like it is.
And so like the Joel character, he says there's only one story left. It's the president's story. But on their way down to DC, he sees the violence in the distance, and he's attracted like a moth to the flame. If there's only one story left, then why go to that like Fallujah scene? The only reason to do that is because there's a high. He's chasing a high, and I think that's something that I don't know. It's something that shows the bankruptcy of his particular character. I think that the lead character is a bit more complicated. Whether or not she's deluding herself or whatever, I'm not sure. But I do think that she has a little bit more of a altruistic moral compass. But not to say that I'm sure that there was a high there too. So,
and she's haunted by it, and it's affecting her at the end where she's at the White House battle.
right. And when she's
really
having that
taken out of it.
conversation with
Sammy,
Sammy. When she's talking with Sammy, he's like, she's lost her faith in journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. By the end of the movie, I think that she decides, I'm basically done. I'm going to just try to be the best mentor I can be to this new journalist because I'm burnt out.
And we have this passing of the old guard to the new guard, and with a literal death and rebirth in that moment.
That's right.
Ron, have you got it? What do you got?
Yeah, I was going to say, I felt like, I don't know if Alex Garland intended this, but it just, the way it was directed, it almost feels like Lee sacrificed herself to give Jesse that shot that they talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like she could have tackled her out of the way.
Right.
She pushed her out of the way and then like stood up. She's smarter than that.
Right.
Like if you're thinking about your life and you're trying to save this other life, like, you're just, you're going to be, I don't know anything about football. I was going to say wide receiver, but I don't think it's the wide receiver who does it. Wide tackle. Like you're tackling the person. You're not pushing them out of the way and then standing up proud, almost knowing that you're going to be shot and giving Jesse an opportunity to get that shot that they talked about.
See, that's funny.
Like,
my son laughed at that scene.
Anyway,
my son laughed at that scene where she gets and I'm sitting there like horrified.
Right. Why did he laugh?
He just thought it was framed really poorly, and he thought why, it's sort of like this is a really cliche moment. See a heroic person push a younger person out of the way and then taking the bullet for them. I was not pleased with him in that moment.
Right.
I took it differently. I thought this is all slow motion. So all she has to do is like pause for a second. She's clearly experiencing PTSD.
Right.
She's not in her right mind. I don't know what to expect of that person in that moment. It's sort of like when you're watching a sporting event in slow motion. You're like, well, it's obvious. You should have done this and this and this. But it's really easy to like kind of, Monday morning quarterback when you're not in the heat of the moment,
And well, I think this too, where we have to separate the filmmaking from the message a little bit, because I definitely think this was a setup very early on. The question Jesse asks Lee is, would you photograph that moment, of my death?
Right.
And she's like, what do you think? And then, but that was Alex Garland telling us exactly how this film was going to end.
Right.
And so when it happens, we're kind of ready for it. And then we get the transference of the old to the new. She's giving her that moment of what was it? Oh, when she's asking her about, how did you get started? And, you took the famous, what was it?
Antifa.
The Antifa massacre.
Yeah.
Which is great because we don't know, did the Antifa massacres or did they get massacred?
Right.
I love how he's always sort of leaving these vague arities. But now Jesse's got a photo that's going to not only the photo of the president, but of Lee, this great feminist icon of photojournalism in her final moment. And so she's transferred, Lee is transferred. So this is clearly a construct that Garland has put together for just good
the other way to look at that is that with photojournalists, you basically, they're like light bulbs. Like as soon as one of them burns out, you just plug in a new one.
You do.
And that's kind of how that profession goes. And really the artist is expendable at that point, right?
Yeah. The number of I was one, and the number of journalists that I've known who've either come through and they're thrill seeking and you're having fun because you show up at a demonstration with your camera. That's how I got started.
Mm-hmm.
To the ones who then graduate and actually become actual photojournalists, like the buddy of mine who got thrown over a wall in DC. He started out as just a guy. He saw me and my buddy. We started hanging out. He was hilarious. We invited him into the heads, with the rest of everybody. And then because that's what he wanted to do. And then I've known other people who've like, oh, this was fun for a hot minute and I'm out. And that was me. And so it very much is, this is where I say this is a stylized and compressed version of this, but it is a version of this. This is how so many photojournalists get their start. They get a niche, they get a camera, and then they just start showing up. And you hope that you can ingratiate yourself with the veterans and then ultimately get picked up. And you take some good photos and your buddy says, hey, that's a really good photo. Let me pass it on to my editor. And the next thing you know, you've got a freelance contract and and then hopefully someday you get healthcare because you get hired by a real journalism company, which doesn't happen anymore because we all know that's going on there.
Did it bother you that they were shooting on film?
So one of the sections we have in our new outline is what worked, what didn't work.
Oh, okay.
And this is absolutely didn't work for me. Yes, there's a resurgence in analog photography for sure by millennials and Zs. Absolutely. And it's great. And even other people. I'm part of a photographic organization here in where I'm in Vermont, 2 of them, in fact. And we have young and old who are all still doing film-based photography. It's great. Did photojournalists in the past do that kind of stuff in the field developing? Yeah, but it was hard and carrying all the chemicals and doing all that kind of stuff. So it was a bit of, again, a stylized moment. No modern photojournalist that I'm familiar with or have seen works with film other than for their own personal artistic vanity enjoyment. Everything that's going out on the wire is digital because you got to upload right away. I did like that she was using Lee was using a Sony A7, which is a good camera and lens. So that was all proper. But anyway, carry on.
So I was wondering if this works in world because there's that scene in the hotel where it's just taking forever to upload these digital photos, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah,
and you get the idea because I've heard other people say, well, why aren't they doing video? I'm thinking in this new America, the infrastructure has collapsed.
Right.
And so you can't trust, that you're going to have that kind of network connection that you had in previous decades.
Agreed.
And so what do? You go back to the previous model where it's not digital and I don't have to worry about my batteries or whatever. I've got the physical media here in my pocket and I have control over that. I'm not worried about an internet connection to make that happen. I don't know. That's how I read it anyway.
No, I think that's a good point.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, I was saying, I think that's a good point. Because they definitely talked about the infrastructure, the lack of power, the long load times, and so being able to shoot with a camera that doesn't need a battery is and we don't have to worry about uploading something.
Also,
the
Jessie character doesn't have a contract yet. She's just doing this for her own benefit.
Exactly.
And she does view the industry with a bit of romance, right? So,
Yep. And I will say that I think the film versus digital thing works on these multiple levels. I think I think you guys both point out the good in world, but I think it also then goes back to something I mentioned before, which is a generational thing that kids these days are getting into, and that is a true thing. So interesting. Let's talk a little bit about, does this film work as an anti-war film? Do we think that it delivered on that message or that theme?
I'll let someone else talk first on this.
Okay, Ron.
I don't know that. I don't. In the sense that if you want to show how horrible war is, yeah, But in a sense of, is it really going to convince people that war is terrible? Like, I don't come away feeling like, oh, this is going to make me want to do anything I can to stop war from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so in that sense, I think it's an anti-war film in the sense of he's depicting the atrocities of war and how terrible war is and what it does to people. I think the stronger themes in the film are more about the kind of choices journalists make in situations like this, because I think that's who we're really focused on.
Right.
I think the moral implications as it relates. I almost feel like there are more moral implications as it relates to the choices the journalists make than they are moral implications as it relates to the choices like the soldiers make.
Right.
Because the soldiers are just soldiering. They're doing what soldiers do.
Well, the dude is like, there's a guy in there that's trying to shoot at us and we're trying to kill him.
And we don't know what side he's on. He's on the side that's trying to kill me. That's all I know.
Exactly.
That's all.
Which is
matters.
a really brilliant moment in that
right.
dialogue of like, why are we out here doing this?
Right. I also thought it was an interesting note that the guy doing the shooting had painted nails and colored hair. Only because, again, it goes against type.
I believe he was maybe an Asian.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think you definitely go into this film. We haven't brought this up yet. I don't know if we bring it up, but they don't make it clear which side, who's red, who's blue. Nothing that's not brought up. That's one of the things I appreciate about it, because seeing the trailer, you know exactly what you're thinking is causing the Civil War.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you really don't know what are the political ideologies of the people who are shooting. I mean, it's clear, though, that the president is some kind of a fascist.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I've heard that I can agree with, that I think Alex Garland has talked about this, one of the ways you could see California and Texas coming together, even if they are still on political opposites, is that whether you're a conservative or a liberal, a Democrat or Republican, we could still come together against fascism, true fascism.
And we have before in our country's history.
Exactly. So if you have a president who is doing all these things, even that could be the spark that gets people to say, okay, we need to step up. So there's just that. So there's that. So yeah, is it an anti-war movie? I don't know. What is an anti-war movie?
Well, I was gonna say when Apocalypse Now came out on VHS and we were in middle school and we watched that, which is a horrific movie about war, right? It's a horror movie in a way. It's the Heart of Darkness, and all we did was we would run around and we would spout off lines from the smell of napalm in the morning scene, right? Or in Full Metal Jacket, the guy in the helicopter who's shooting civilians from the helicopter as they're going out in that part. So I don't believe that there's an anti-war movie that has ever been made that is successful in its intention of being anti-war. I've watched a lot of war movies. It's one of my favorite genres, and I don't want to go to war, certainly not at my age or my current situation. Right. But man, as a young person, it was an enthralling idea, and no movie, a movie you could show me would ever dissuade me.
I think that this movie has a lot of analogs with Vietnam movies of the late 70s and 80s.
Did you get an Apocalypse Now vibe?
Oh, absolutely.
Times? Yeah,
I felt like this is it's almost exactly what you would expect from a Vietnam movie from that era. Right. But then placed on domestic soil. And I mean, the journalism part of it was unique and interesting as well. I just feel like what you are both putting your finger on, and it's absolutely true, is that as soon as you bring any kind of stylistic element to the silver screen, you're glorifying it, right?
Absolutely.
But to me, the way that this film does it is significantly different than a film that glorifies violence. The one question that I had was, I'm not sure what to do with the needle drops. There's that one scene where they're going through the building,
the Boogaloo Boys
they,
assault.
They got to go take take down the sniper,
loyalists.
And then they do the a summary execution,
Mm-hmm.
and then immediately it's all very harrowing, and then immediately De La Soul Say No Go comes on,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm thinking like, yeah, this rocks. I'm like totally into this. And then of course I'm like thinking about myself, like, why did that emotion happen with me? It's like there was something about the framing and the action and the music that evoked a certain emotion in me. And now I'm kind of questionably, sort of rooting for the violence at that point. So, and I'm not, and I absolutely love myself an anti-war movie. So I want to know what you guys think about the way that the needle drops worked in this.
I want to quickly, before Ron, I want to get your take on that for sure, but I want to just quickly go to that whole Boogaloo Boys scene, because those guys were wearing flowered shirts.
Oh, interesting.
Which is what Boogaloo Boys wear, right? But then we had the sniper scene in the Christmas thing, and those guys, we're not sure who they were. So I love, again, he's playing with ambiguity around this.
Yeah.
But then that scene of them going up to the top of the stairs and encountering the loyalist soldier who's up there, that's so Full Metal Jacket. That is a scene where there's a big battle scene and there's a sniper and a bunch of people get killed and that kind of stuff. So he's really reaching into a deep well of prior film war inspirations and comps. And I got a list of comps that we can go over a little bit later. But that was brilliant. And that needle drop was absolutely. Ron, are you a De La Soul fan at all? Is that part of your musical history?
Yeah, no, of course. I love me some De La Soul.
Yeah.
It was, it's kind of jarring in the sense like it doesn't feel like the kind of music that you would go with a scene like that, but they're very intentional in picking it. And, it creates this tension between what they're doing and the kind of feeling that music generally elicits.
Did you find the whole of the sound design for this film to be a compelling part of the construction?
I did.
Of what Alex
that's
built
what I was
as a
saying.
movie?
If you could see it in a big theater, you definitely should. And I forget which one were wearing the Boogaloo Boys shirts. The ones that the journalists were with, or the ones that they were going after.
So as I understand it, the camouflage soldiers that they were fighting inside of the building were loyalist forces, and the Boogaloo Boys were not Western Alliance. They were people who were in opposition to the loyalist president's forces.
Got it. But they weren't. But you got the impression they weren't part of the Western forces.
Correct. They weren't part of the Western Alliance, right?
Oh, okay.
Who were uniformed and regimented. I felt that this was more of a group of insurgents, people who were just fighting, again, for what side, I don't know. They didn't kill our journalist protagonists. They let them tag along and document.
Right. They were working with them.
Yeah.
Which again, so you have all this subtle coding, right? Where you have these insurgents who are wearing Boogaloo Boy shirts, but you have these other snipers who are kind of dressed
in military camouflage, like they look properly
military
equipped.
Camouflage and everything. But I'm talking about the snipers at the Christmas town.
Oh, the snipers at Christmas town, yeah.
Who had painted nails and colored hair, which is not.
They were in ghillie suits, and the guy that they ran over was uniformed. So yeah, that is a completely ambiguous scene. I have no idea in the Christmas town scene who is on whose side.
Right. I think that's the point of that scene, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Totally. But you just have this. You just have these subtle codings that, some of the people who are fighting are coded to be sort of like far right, and some of the people who are
Jesse
fighting
Plemons.
are coded to be more right. He almost seems like chaos. Like I get the impression for him from the and we maybe I know this is a good time to talk about it. But I get the impression for him.
All good.
He is almost like a chaotic factor in the whole mix.
Mm-hmm.
Like he definitely has. Like I don't think he's for anybody except his demented idea of what it means to be American. Like I could. So it's hard to see whether or not he would be for what the president is doing. He just wants to know. Like he immediately kills those. He kills the two Asian characters when he finds out where they're from. And so he has this, and he's doing these war crimes with these, civilians that he ostensibly killed. And it's
I think that, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's, in talking about this, I always have to fight. I always have to fight against the I always want to say unalived because I do a lot of TikTok videos.
Yeah.
And so there's all these code words you use.
Yeah.
Because if you use words like kill, TikTok, it supposedly suppresses your video. So every time I'm about to say kill, my instinct is to say unalive. It's like, wait a minute, this is a podcast. I can talk normal now.
Yes.
So Jesse Plemons is this character who I kind of feel is like there's just this chaotic force who's in it for himself. He's not really fighting on any side other than his dimension idea of what true America looks like.
And this is where the movie slides into the comparison for me of Yugoslavia, and where you had a country of federated states, and then suddenly they broke apart, and suddenly those state lines mean something. And for him, what kind of America? He accepts Wagner Moura's Florida. He certainly accepts the two white women.
Yeah, Colorado and Missouri, right?
Right. But
and
he
then
does not
kills
accept
the Chinese who he codes as Chinese.
Right.
Just on site. No more questions.
Right.
So,
and if you look in the pit, I believe there's a lot of non-white faces in that, of the bodies.
Oh, yeah. I didn't look that closely, but I need to watch it again and see.
Yeah. So, which is a whole other topic I had to kind of slide off the music thing and into the race thing, because something I did notice was a lot of characters of color died. The Boogaloo boy who was behind the pillar, he died. Obviously, the Chinese characters. In the Boogaloo boy scene when they're assaulting the building, they're trying to lay down suppressing fire to get their buddy out who's trapped behind a column.
Right.
And he's a black man. And when he makes his run for it, he gets shot.
Oh, right.
And of course, Sammy is killed. And then the two Chinese characters.
Tony and I don't know the other guy's name. But
Bohai.
Yeah, Bohai and Tony get killed. Now, I do think
But then there's a black woman holding the president at gunpoint at the end.
Well, I was going to ask about that. I was wondering about... See, I'm a little bit reluctant to put too much of this on Alex Garland because he's British, and I think that this could be as much of a commentary on Brexit than anything else. But I wondered if he's trying to say something about almost a little bit of both sidesism when you had the black soldier on the force that's invading the White House, and then you had the black press secretary who's executed in the press room.
Right.
And I wonder if there was like some kind of commentary like, look, these two sides, they're so similar. You almost can't tell one from the other. I don't know. What did you think that was? What did you think about that?
In the refugee, where they overnight with the refugee camp, it was a lot of people of color in that scene. And then one vehicle, as they pass the checkpoint, it's a black family who's leaving as they're going in. So yeah, I don't know what to make of Garland's. Is he aware of race coded issues in an American context as opposed?
I think
to
it's.
Brit?
I mean, I really want to hear from Ron on this, but I do think that I'm open to the idea that Garland thinks he understands it and doesn't quite understand it. But anyway,
I didn't get the impression, but I mean, when we mention and you point all those things out, it does come to mind. So I don't know that I didn't come away from the movie feeling like race and racial issues is one of the things that was being discussed by the movie.
Is that lack? Do you feel like that's a lack in the movie?
I think you can make an argument that it is, considering how much race plays in the current political discourse. But if in the context of the movie, you're fighting against someone who, I mean, obviously the Jesse Plemons character is the one place where that does happen. But that's why I get the feeling like he just seems like an island of chaos in terms of who he's fighting for. I don't get the impression from, like you mentioned, David, the people who were on the president's side, many of them were people of color. The press secretary was a black woman.
The sergeant in the final assault, she's a black woman who's leading, who's in charge of that assault, literally. Because one of the tactical guys, okay, Sergeant, we got to move, we got to keep going. He's ceding authority to her. He comes up to her on the outside of the battle and says, "What do you I've got this team. What do you need?" And she's in with that group. And so I don't wonder that I don't think he's playing intentionally with race here. And I actually kind of find that refreshing. As much as I noticed that characters of color were dying, and it's something that I try to pay attention to see what are filmmakers or television makers doing. I didn't get the sense of this film that he is intentionally putting any sort of racial spin on the storyline. It didn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, no, I didn't feel that way at all.
Right.
Me personally. And whether or not that is something you can criticize it for, yeah, you could. I wouldn't personally, but I think you can make an argument. I think there's so many themes that are being discussed. I think he's, as much as possible, he's sticking to the ideas of journalism, moral integrity, war. Yeah. Race would almost muddy things.
Along with politics, if it were overtly political or overtly racial, it would muddy the story.
Like, for the same reason why I think it was smart not to make it overtly political, it was smart not to make it overtly racial.
I want to, as we're starting to wrap up on time here, I wanted to run through some of the set pieces or the main scenes, because this is a road movie, right? So we're moving from road scene to road scene. So I just kind of wanted to run through the movie and just get some quick reactions and your thoughts, because there's a lot of great cinematography, again, needle drops and sound design. And I think if we sort of use that as a skeleton just to call out some of the things that we really enjoyed or didn't work for us, if there wasn't. Starting off with the suicide bombing and the whole beginning of the film, I loved that visual imagery of the woman running in with the flag and having that to sort of start things off. I thought it was arresting in a lot of ways. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I know it was. In a way, it kind of almost felt like it was almost unrealistic. Like I don't, in the sense of, I don't picture. It's hard to picture. For me, it's hard to picture a white woman being a suicide bomber.
Right.
Just to be frank.
Radicalized.
Right. And so that was something that was so against type. It was kind of hard to me. Not that it wouldn't happen, but it was hard for me to imagine that.
Right.
Like, I think it would have been easier for me to pick that if for that short scene, it was someone who would be more stereotypically known to do something.
Right.
Yeah, it could be that sort of is kicking off the theme. It's like, this is in America, and then, but this is a situation that's going to be a whole different can of worms that you're not expecting. I did like the idea that immediately Lee recognizes that as a suicide bomber.
As soon as she saw it running, she knew right away what it was.
And she has a sense, it's almost like she has this preternatural sense for how a scene of chaos will unfold, because then we see that later on at the White House, like everyone's shooting at the limousine, and she realizes, oh, there's no way the president's in there. We're going to walk in the front door.
And honestly, I thought the same thing. It's like, no way the president's in that.
Right. So you'd be great.
Right.
We need to give you a camera, send you into some war zones.
Were you satisfied with Kirsten Dunst's performance of the lead character?
Oh yeah, I thought she was really good in terms of her face just shows the fatigue she has of doing this kind of thing. Throughout the whole thing, towards the end, her PTSD response, which to me explains why she was willing to give up her life, because she's just tired of it all.
She's done.
She's done. And I think, maybe after coming from the town, like you were saying, Anthony, where people are seeing the images and it's not affecting them.
That kind of breaks
that
her.
sense of futility you must have of, I'm risking my life out here to bring these images to you, and you people are like, you don't care. What's the point of it all? And
Which goes back
so much. She's seen so much, and she's taking these photos, hoping to warn our country. And now our country is like, really, it's like the point of her job isn't to prevent this from happening. It's literally just to document it for posterity, so people in the future can know this is what happened. I always like to say that line from Battlestar Galactica, oh, this is happening again. Oh, this has happened before. Oh, this will happen again.
So
and it's true. We're going to repeat, once we come out of this war, 100, 200 years down the line, there will be something else we'll be fighting each other about. So.
And Wagner says at that point when they're in at the base in Charlottesville, that Sammy didn't even die for anything good. So her mentor, her beloved mentor, we all knew what Sammy meant to you. She's got, what has she got left? And she sees the future generation coming. So she could live a broken down. They show her PTSD scene earlier on in the hotel room when she's in the bathtub, and she's reliving these scenes of this horribleness that she's seen. And so for her to let go in that moment, knowing that, the next generation is there. That's an interesting. Let's talk about the car wash scene a little bit.
That was tough.
Disturbing.
Yeah. One, the whole time it's tense because you don't know who these dudes are, whose side they're on, what they want to do. They have guns.
What's to stop them from just shooting them and taking their money? Their Canadian money.
Exactly.
I love the little Canadian.
I know that was very interesting when she says, first he says, she says there's $300. He goes, that won't even get you a sandwich. That says a lot right there. Like our economy has fallen to the point where the dollar is probably worth literally pennies. And then she says Canadian, and then his eyes perk up.
Yeah.
So I thought that's good. So a lot of information dropped there. And then, just the idea of like, we don't know who those guys are that are strung up. The fact that they're still alive.
Went to high school with that dude.
Yeah. It's horrible.
He says that. Anthony, what did you think?
I forgot about that line.
Yeah. What did you think of the way that the Lee character diffused the tense situation there when they were looking at the bodies in the car wash?
It was pretty harrowing. I feel like that scene did more for me to sort of develop, almost deconstruct the character of Jessie. She's got this idea of what it will be like to be a war reporter, but she doesn't know
no fucking clue
how intimately she's going to be involved. I mean, there's a sense in which those guys don't get executed if those photographers don't show up. Right. So here you have these objective journalists who they're just there to get gas. They're just doing their job. But because they've arrived at this particular gas station at this particular moment, those guys in the back are going to die. So they're absolutely influencing the lives of the
It's a good
victims.
point. Didn't even think about that because journalists are trained to quote unquote be objective. Right. And to not partake. There's a famous photograph from Ethiopia, I believe it was, where there's a starving child with a vulture in the background. And this is depicted in the movie Bang Bang Club. And the photojournalist who was from South Africa got a lot of grief from around the world for that. Like, why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you do anything? He's like, I did, but I took the photo first. Right? So it's this idea of, are we objective and can we be objective, and do we participate or not? And the guy actually literally says to Jesse, well, you flip a coin, you decide. And I loved how Lee understands human nature enough to say, oh, let me take your picture. And instantly his ego turns from killing these dudes to, oh, how do you want me to pose? Like, should I hold my rifle like this? Should I like this? And instantly deconflicts the situation. It's again showing her ability to understand conflict zones and navigate and survive.
Yeah, it's interesting the point you made about photojournalists. Years ago, I had a photography podcast where I interviewed some of like the top photographers in the world. And one of the photographers I interviewed was Vincent Laforet, and he was this like Canon photographer who kind of made the Canon 5D famous for video. He made this little video back in 2008. He was one of the first person to get a hold of the 5D that can shoot DSLR video. He made this little video called Reverie that kind of like blew up and really took off the DSLR video movement.
Got it.
But I was interviewing him for the podcast, and we were talking about photographs, and this was a few years after Katrina, and we were talking about some of the photos taken during Katrina. I was asking him how it was odd that there were a lot of photos where, how can you take a photo? Like, you can see someone needs help right here, and you're taking a photo. I remember him talking about exactly what you were just saying. Like, and Jesse kind of mentions this in the, not Jesse, Lee. Lee mentions this in the film. Yeah. It's our job to take the photo, someone else's job to tell the story, or something like those lines. So,
you make the decision. We give you
right. Right. And the role that is played of documenting that, but at the same time, do you document? Is it worth, like, if you know that someone's going to die if you don't intervene, do you take the photo anyway? Like, if it was a choice between taking the photo and the person, like, you take the photo, the person dies. You don't take the photo, you save the person, but then you lose the photo. Kind of like what happens with Lee at the end.
And that's a question that journalists often ask themselves. I've been at lots of rallies and demonstrations where there's this phalanx of photographers, and a cop steps out or a Molotov cocktail is thrown, and the photographers swarm on that moment of violence because we're all trying to capture that moment of beauty, that horrific beauty of, the cocktail exploding or the police officer in mid-swing. And so we're attracted to the violence. That's if it leads, it bleeds story. And would some of this violence occur if photographers weren't there? If videographers weren't there?
That's why I think the movie is more about the moral decisions that these journalists are making in the middle of all these horrible atrocities. And to some extent, what is it saying about us as a people who want to see that? Maybe. Like, seeing that is more important than actually saving the life of the person.
And is any war film an anti-war film? Could it be ever an anti-war film? Yeah.
Right. And I like the comparison you made to Apocalypse Now, because I was thinking about it. In a lot of ways, the president is like Colonel Kurtz, if you think about it. And they're going up the river to try to get to him. And like Kurtz, he's kind of like sacrificed at the end. So that is I think that's again, I don't know if Garland, I always think a filmmaker of his, I don't see a filmmaker of his caliber could not be making those connections as he's writing it and shooting it.
Sure.
You know,
it's the context we're in. It just, you can't help
totally.
it. So we talked a lot about the Boogaloo Boy assault already. So anything from the refugee camp and that moment where we see a lot of scenes of
that was interesting. Like they're all like having a grand old time. It's almost like a party.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get the sense there's this levity throughout the camp, kids playing. I don't know if that's a sense of like these are so common, like this is just how people live now.
Makes me think of images from Katrina in New Orleans, where people sort of had to
definitely
live in refugee camps and such.
Using a stadium as a refugee camp.
Anthony, what did you make of the? Oh, go ahead. I want to keep us rolling.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Anthony, what did you think of the peaceful town? Did that disturb you at all?
I think that was. It's like one of those moments where you need to be reminded about what normalcy looks like, because once you're in the movie, it's just one violent scene after the next, one bit of chaos after the next.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that bit of respite. It's like just a tiny bit of like drop of cold water in the desert.
Nice. Yeah.
To remind you like, this is what we lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so it works as a storytelling technique to have that little moment of like, let's just shop for a dress and pretend like we're, living in the America we used to know.
And Joel gets a cool hat, and we have a little levity there. Like, are you going to take my picture? And she's like, no.
Right. And also it was a really crucial moment because for Lee's character,
mm-hmm.
not only is she realizing that her old profession is falling out off of her identity. She's now glomming onto a new identity. She's like, I see this. I'm having a connection with this daughter-ish figure.
Right.
And
this life
so
that
now,
I could never choose because I was this other
so
thing.
my professional ego is sort of dying, and this other kind of more human connection is rising. And so you can kind of immediately, you're like, well, this person's probably not going to
exactly. That's a big signal. You're going to die.
Probably not going to make it to the end of the movie.
If I think about it a little bit more, the one place where I did see some overt consideration of race besides the Jesse Plemons scene is with the men standing up on the roof there, which I almost missed. But that did with the Sammy character outside. It almost gave me that sort of sense of in the South where the firemen and the postal carrier and everybody in town was kind of if a black family showed up, we're watching you. This is a sundown town. These kinds of things. It gave me that ominous sense of this is a little bit of an old
and Sammy
thing that we've
says,
done before.
Yeah, right. Lee says, I almost, this reminds me of everything I forgot. And then Sammy says, this is what I remember.
Yes, exactly.
Look up. There's the two white guys up there with guns. That's exactly what I remember.
Watching.
So it's subtle. Yeah. It's so subtle you could miss it, right?
Yeah. Let's bounce quickly Charlottesville and then to the White House battle. The Charlottesville stuff was amazing. It was amazing to see a well-organized force after all this militia stuff. But I just thought the whole thing of seeing the embedded journalist was a great, again, it's a really well-constructed story. He's dropping in all the mechanics, the gears and the twists where we need them to be. But then when Wagner Moura is screaming at the loss of both Bohai and Tony and of Sammy, but it's silent with the music, the sound effects in the background. That was just a really powerful scene for me.
No, I agree. That was. And it was weird. It was almost, for me, that was the first time I got a sense that the government, I guess, I'm trying to remember if I got a sense that the government was the quote unquote bad guy at that point. Because you go into the movie not knowing, like, technically who, like, it's a civil war, but is this like the original Civil War where the government, and we can have a debate whether or not the government in the original Civil War was good, but for all intents and purposes, the North were the good guys and the South were the bad guys. But in this one, we don't know if the quote unquote government, the U.S. government, are the good guys,
Mhm.
and the it seems like, you know, in the original Civil War, the states seceded because they wanted to keep people who look like me enslaved. In this Civil War, we don't know why they seceded, but you get the context that they seceded because a fascist president took over and is doing all these horrible things. And so it seems like, you know, the U.S. government are the ones that we would be rooting against. Not that the people who are succeeded are angels by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of who you want to see come out on top. And so when we get to Charlottesville, that's the first impression I got. Also because as morally complicated as like Joel and maybe even Lee, all these journalists are, we do get the sense that they are fighting for something good in a sense of making the world better, right? So the fact that they are comfortable in this group and that they are interacting, you get the sense that the Western forces
didn't kill him on sight. And they actually were trying to, you know, if Sammy had been able to be saved, we saw medics there and like they were attending to him.
Exactly. Right. And you're told earlier that they killed journalists on site in DC, again suggesting what's happened. The people in DC, they don't want this getting out. You know, it's like, you know, they, like a fascist government, they want to control the narrative. And
we see later at the White House battle, the wall that's been constructed around the old executive office building in the White House and all of that. So
exactly. So you get a sense like, okay, the Western forces are trying to return the nation back to some semblance of decency.
Right. Right. So
I feel like, just real quick, I feel like,
go please.
It's not, for me, it wasn't coded nearly as well if they did want to sort of balance the sides. Like Ron Swanson's character,
President Swanson.
Nick Offerman's character does at least 3 Trumpisms as the movie begins.
Totally.
Right?
Oh, totally.
Some people are saying, you know, this is the greatest, right? And then
completely
of course
coded.
It's he's totally a Trump figure. Washington D.C. is an enemy of the press, right? The press is the enemy. Yep. So for me, it's pretty clear.
Term.
Yes, someone who actually tried to stay in office, right? You know,
deconstructed the FBI, right? Because they can't be investigated.
All of that tells me that Alex Garland was thinking about creating a Trump type who he does not name, and he puts that person in the White House. And so I am thinking that the loyalists are sort of code onto the MAGA of current political climate, right?
Yeah.
So, but by the end of the movie, I'm thinking, well, he's done a really great job of showing me that war creates villains out of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So at the beginning of the movie, I'm thinking, I know who the good guys and bad guys are. By the end of the movie, I'm thinking, I don't know that these are all people who are involved in a war, and war is evil. So that they're all tainted now because of this.
Yeah. That's for sure.
I would say that, but at the end of the day, I still want the fascists to
shoot the Nazis.
But do we lose our humanity in doing that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one thing that's asked is like, you have to watch people die, and you have to,
and our
you
memories
have to go to places that are dark that you wouldn't probably otherwise go. So,
and our memories are short as a species, and so from one I think most of our World War II generation is almost all, but that group is all but passed on, and so in Vietnam, that's complicated because of the way that. Anyway, let's not go down that road. Let's talk about the exhilarating White House battle. I think from just a movie standpoint, and I'm just taking off my anti-war hat, this was a great fight scene. And it was a great way. I was entertained by it. And I thought the exterior battle moving into the interior, I love this kind of action and storytelling. And I just thought it was expertly done. And I never got lost in the battle, who's where. I understood the stakes and what was going on. I loved the depiction of, like, say, with Jesse, when they were in the Boogaloo Boys battle, he was holding.
I can't get that image out of my head. He's like holding the back of her shirt.
That's right.
And like moving her out like she's a chess piece.
Yeah.
Into the danger and then out of the danger. Into the danger and out of the danger. So yeah, I can't get that image out of my head.
He's actually hauling Lee around.
Right. Yes.
He's actually picking her up and dragging her until they get into the White House, and then she's sort of more on her own.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was an exhilarating fight scene, I thought, and it worked really well on the big screen, and just the loudness of what an interior gun battle would sound like. I thought
so. The objective of that battle is clear. They're going to execute the president. There's they've decided ahead of time they're not going to take him as prisoner or let him go into exile.
Right, which were informed of by the other journalists, right?
They really need a journalist to show that he's been killed. Otherwise, he kind of becomes this cult figure. You know, it's like he's still alive. He's going to come back and
Elvis are out there hanging out.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So
that's right. So they really need a journalist there because it's a political end. This is not just a battle that they're trying to win. They're trying to effectively end the other side's, they're taking the king basically. But in order to take the king, you need proof that you've done it.
Yep.
Because you did not win unless there's proof that you took the king. So in that way, the journalists are integral to the storytelling. And I thought that was a really effective way to bring them into the story.
And we talked about the quote earlier, but the fact that he's begging for his life.
Yeah.
Adds to what you were saying there. They're not only did they take the king, but they deflated him so that he's just a guy.
Mm-hmm.
His mythology is deflated because what was he doing?
Yeah.
I did it for the country. I did it for, the people who follow me. I did it for you. He's like, don't kill me, which is selfish and small.
He's got no Latin phrase that he shouts out before he jumps onto the stage or something. He's just a weak and miserable, wannabe dictator at that point.
Any final?
David, I was going to say basically what you're telling me is people like you are the reason why there's war because you enjoyed it. You enjoy it.
I enjoyed it.
We now know what kind of person you go to that sleepy town and David's in the back room with popcorn watching all the newsreels. This is so great.
You've outed me.
I'm just joking.
I know.
No, it was exhilarating. It was intense, right?
Yeah.
It was because
you didn't know what was going to happen. You knew we knew what was going to happen, but we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I was I was actually confused when Lee got shot. I was like, is she dead? Because they were wearing Kevlar, right? Like,
yeah.
And her head wasn't exploded, so she didn't take a headshot.
But the lower part of her weight, her sort of low back to upper waist is not covered, and down through.
I think she died of a broken heart.
Right.
I do want to say,
I was wondering, Anne was like, they didn't kill her, did she? Like, is she dead? So it took me to the end of the movie to realize, okay, I think she is dead.
Yeah, for reals.
I do want to point out one last thing. I think that for Americans, it's hard to get our head around how big of a move Brexit was. And I think that for Alex Garland, he lived through that as a Brit, and he's also observing the discourse in our country.
Right.
It's Brexit was every bit as consequential as if like a state like California or a state like Texas seceded from the Union.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think he is speaking to us as someone who has participated in the discourse of America, but who has also seen what can happen to an old established country like England.
Right. That's a good point.
If depending on where that goes. And of course, I would guess that America would be far more likely to descend into violence than a place like England. That's just my, as someone who's lived in both countries, I feel like that is my sense.
Yeah. And I remember traveling. I was traveling through.
Sorry, really quick. Let's just use this moment as our sort of final wrap up thoughts. So
that's good. Yeah. No, I remember traveling through. I was going to say traveling through UK in the middle of Brexit and talking to people. And every morning, the House of Commons and the House of Lords were like in the hotels we were staying at. You just saw them yelling every morning.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was like, the red room and the green room keep fighting all the time. I wonder what they're fighting. It was right in the middle of Brexit. Mm-hmm. So, wrapping it up, I think it was very good. I want to see it again. I be curious to see. I think the performances are worthy. The storytelling is really good. The kind of conversations it drums up, or is it like what great movie making and filmmaking is about? So, I think it was a good achievement.
So I rewatched Ex Machina last night for like the 7th time.
I've never seen it.
Oh my gosh! All right,
I have to go see it now. Yeah.
Well, now you got a little treat for you. All right. So I thought that is a movie that did not. I won't spoil anything.
Okay.
That is a movie that did not do as well in the theater.
Right.
But is one of these rewatchable movies where you get more and more and more out every single time you watch it. And I feel like Civil War will be again one of those movies where it's like sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 watches before you like, oh, now I get the conversation that he wants us to have.
Right. Nice. My 2 thoughts. I love this film. I really, one of the things that really worked for me in this film was the movie camera going from the cinematography to the still frame to get us behind the camera. I thought that was a really excellent device. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I think for me, a scene that encapsulates this movie for me is when they're taking a picture of the crashed helicopter in front of the or was it the Sears or JCPenney's? I think it was JCPenney's.
JCPenney, yeah.
I swear I've been to that mall because I saw that archway in the back. I'm like, I've seen that somewhere before.
I thought the same thing. I was like, have I been there?
Exactly, right?
I'm sure it's in Atlanta. Everything is shot in Atlanta now.
Right.
So.
Well, there's something up in the Northeast.
I used to live in it. I wonder if I used to live in Atlanta, and it reminded me of the JCPenney at the Mall of Georgia.
But this image of this helicopter, which is an exquisite machine. It is a balance of nature, of forces of nature, and harnessed by a machine that is dangerous but beautiful and utilitarian. But here it is; it's all wrapped up in these power lines, and it's burned out and crashed. And that was a metaphor for America, for me. That if we're not careful, that was the warning scene.
Yeah, I remember that.
Out of that. Yeah, that we could get tangled up in this stuff, and we can absolutely crash and burn if we're not careful. Yeah. So, some quick comparisons to other movies: Full Metal Jacket, 1987, The Year of Living Dangerously, Mel Gibson, 1982, good movie about war journalism in Indonesia. Under Fire with Nick Nolte in 1983. The Killing Fields, obviously, in 1984, which is about Cambodia and, again, journalists. Salvador, yes, in 1986. The Bang Bang Club in 2010. There's a great documentary called War Photographer about James Natchway. I can never pronounce his last name right, from 2001. And then we have a very recent example, 20 Days in Mariupol in 2023, which was up for an Oscar. So all of those movies are strong war journalism movies if you want to compare it to other things. We've got a couple of pieces of feedback. So I'm going to play a quick voicemail from Red Zippy, who's one of our Lorehound supporters. So here's her voicemail.
Hello, this is Red Zippy. Just got back from seeing Civil War, and I thought it was terrific. It definitely helped to understand before seeing the movie that this is not a political film. You're not going to get explanations, both sides, any of that. Essentially, it is a movie about war photographers and being on their trip from one place to another and what happens to them in between. And that set me up perfectly, I think, to really enjoy the movie and not get hung up on anything else. I also took great care to almost like act like a war photographer in the sense that I just observed everything, whatever Garland wrote or shot, those kind of scenes. Where did the camera linger? It was just really fascinating to see his version of what this country would look like in certain spaces. So that was a really, really terrific. I really, really enjoyed it. That's really all I have to say right now. So again, if you go in knowing that, this isn't a political movie really, I think you'll do even better. And I definitely was one of those that wondered why Texas and California were on one side. And I love what I read in the Discord that he was deliberate about it. What could have happened that would have conjoined California and Texas against the rest of America? Anyway, so wonderful film. 2 thumbs up. I highly recommend.
Awesome. Thanks, Red Zippy. I think it's pretty much on track with what we were discussing.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one email from John, aka Viama, a good friend of the pod and also a Lorehound supporter. I thought Civil War was a really good movie and probably not the one I was expecting. I believe John's also in the UK, so there might be an interesting crossover here. I've seen the trailer and I was expecting a lot more of red versus blue situation. What we got was an anti-war movie showing the horrors involved through the literal lens of photojournalists. The political message is that could even happen in the USA and to be careful for what you wish for. Which is an interesting point. There's a lot of people who do have fever dreams of a civil war in our country right now.
Yeah.
I felt superbly manipulated by the De La Soul needle drop, tapping my toes and celebrating the win for the gunfight until the execution scene rapidly put paid to that. Wagner Moura is rapidly becoming one of my favorite actors. He was great in Narcos, but seeing him in more recent roles in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and now this really showcases his charm and swagger. He'll be into bigger things, no doubt. A punch to the guts, but one that I was glad to see on the big screen. John, a.k.a. Viama. Thanks, John. Thanks for writing in. So again, still tracking. I think Wagner Moura is... his character was great, too. He was the charmer. He could just kind of talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Oh, he's just got such charisma, which, a villain or anti-hero with charisma is always...
it's always a good...
enjoyable to watch, right?
And I like how John mentions here, superbly manipulated by the De La Soul needle drop, which was what you were, what was happening
Absolutely.
for you.
Absolutely.
Anthony. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're done for there. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'll do the outro if you guys want to bounce. I'll wrap it up. But Anthony, what have you got on deck? You've got some big things with Game of Thrones coming up or House of the Dragon?
So, we're going to be re-releasing our Double Dragon feed for in preparation for House of the Dragon. And then Steve and I will do a rewatch once the season is complete.
Nice. Cool. Ron, we don't have anything specific on deck. I know you wanted to do some 3-body problem. We've just got to get around to scheduling that. Anthony, you looked up when I said 3-body problem just now. Are you interested or is that too much?
No. I don't get the fascination. I did not buy into the 3-body problem.
No, I was not a huge fan of it at the end. That's
okay. Right.
I have some issues with it.
Ron, what else are you up to? Find you on TikTok these days and other socials?
I'm at Blurred. I'm on all the places at Blurred Ronnie, BLERDRONNER. And look forward to our future conversations. I appreciate the invites.
Of course, you're part of the club now, so we'll be talking again. Great, gentlemen, thanks so very much, and I'll talk a little bit about the subscriber benefits and other scheduling stuff on my own. But if you guys want to bounce, you can do it. So, well, that was a really great conversation, and as a podcaster, that's the kind of stuff I live for. So, hope you enjoyed that. I'm just here really quick. Wanted to give a couple of notes about our subscription offerings, as well as some upcoming schedule notes and a shout out to our top tier subscribers. If you enjoyed that kind of podcast and that kind of content and conversation, then I'd invite you to subscribe to the Lorehounds and support us in that. All of our co-hosts get to partake in any of the revenue that we generate, as well as covering a lot of costs that we have in terms of software subscriptions and other platforms and things that we need to be able to produce these types of podcasts. Subscribers get ad-free episodes and early access to everything, as well as access to our show tracker, which allows you to look to see what's coming up in TV world, TV and movie world, and all kinds of other benefits. Consider subscribing for a year as well. We give a nice, generous discount on a yearly subscription. Supercast is what we're kind of moving towards. It's like Patreon, but better. We get a little better return on it, and we get a little bit more feature and tools. But if you like Patreon and you just want to stick with that, that works just as well. It's the same on either side in terms of the levels of support. So I'd invite you to consider that. There are links in the show notes, or you can hop on to our Discord and find out more information. Just ask a question, and there'll be folks there who'd be happy to help you. In terms of our Discord, it's a great place to have conversations with us, all the co-hosts, with John, Alicia, and I, as well as a really fun and engaging community with a lot of people who are passionate about television and movie, who really enjoy quality discourse, having some fun online together, kind of a third virtual place. We've got a great moderator team. We are working on all kinds of projects all the time. And so we've got lots of channels and threads set up so that all those conversations have a good place to be had without spoiling anything for any particular show or anything like that. Quick notes about our upcoming schedule and some of our affiliate podcasts. If you watched Fallout, then definitely check out Radioactive Ramblings. That is Aaron and Chase. Aaron is one of our Discord moderators, and he's very passionate about the Fallout world and put a whole Notion document together with all kinds of deep lore. He grabbed his buddy Chase, and they have released, I believe all of their podcasts are out at this stage. Covering the show, which a binge dropped on Amazon. And I think they're going to continue. So definitely subscribe to their channel and listen as they continue on with doing some more podcasting. I'm not sure what they're going to be covering next, but we'll get word of that before long. Rings and Rituals is another great affiliate podcast. If you have been a listener for a while, you know Marilyn Arpakila. She's our resident Tolkien scholar and all-around fantasy expert, and her and sci-fi. She knows a lot about sci-fi too. Her and Dr. Sarah Brown from Signum University are analyzing the season 1 of Rings of Power through the lens of ritual. But don't think that you have to have watched Rings and Ritual, or Rings of Power, or watched it recently to listen to this podcast. It's a really fascinating, in-depth conversation about the role that ritual plays in our lives. And they not only dig into the Tolkien legendarium, but they look around us in our modern lives and to other IP properties as well. That is a separate feed, so please go subscribe to that and give a listen. They're doing about a podcast every other week, and it's running right now, and I believe up to episode 3 is out as we are. Alicia over at Wolshift Dust is covering Beacon 23 season 2. She's doing a lot of work with us as well on Shogun and some other things. She has a Star Wars timeline podcast that's coming up where she's going to be looking at Star Wars, all of Star Wars from across, using the timeline as a way to examine the entirety of the Star Wars property. And I believe she's got some Dune stuff still in the pipeline. So check her out on the Wolshift Dust feed. And again, we have Properly Howard movie review. That's Anthony, who you just heard, and his, I believe, best friend, Steve, who is a stand-up comic. They review old movies, and always with a tongue-in-cheek sort of attitude, and they rate the films based on how better or worse it was from a Ron Howard movie. This season, they've just launched their new season, Felonies and Fugazis, and they've got a list of 10 really wild crime-related movies. They just had Point Break. They're going to do Shakedown, Tango and Cash, Pulp Fiction, Grosse Point Blank, and a number of other movies. Check them out on the Properly Howard movie review feed. We've got a channel set up in the Discord. We've also got a whole Notion movie tracker for them, so you can see what the movies are, read the log lines, watch the trailers if there's one that you want to watch. And definitely, it's a lot of fun. It's just good. You don't even have to have seen the movies to enjoy the podcast. They have a lot of fun talking about it. In terms of the Lorehounds, we're wrapping up with Shogun. This is the week we're recording this just before the final episode of Shogun, episode 10. So we'll have coverage of that. And then we're going to do a season wrap-up podcast. And we're going to bring in Nate Ledbetter, who's a PhD candidate and a member of the East Asian Studies at Princeton, East Asian Studies Department at Princeton. He's been dropping lore and knowledge bombs all over the Discord. We're going to have him on because he's just a great person to get a perspective on what this season was like overall, especially the historicity of it. Alicia and I just released a one-shot movie review of Monkey Man. Alicia really loved that movie, and so we had a great time talking about that. We've got our ongoing stuff, Star Wars Film Festival, Silmarillion Stories. John and Marilyn just recorded a pod for that. We've got a Earthsea coming out. We've got a Dick Turpin one-shot coming, as well as I think we're going to do a 3-body problem, but I'm not sure. No promises there. And let's see. Coming up at future, we have some Doctor Who coverage. John and Alicia are going to cover that. Definitely going to do The Acolyte, which will start June 5th. House of the Dragon, June 13th. The Bear, which will be late June. That'll be a binge drop. So a lot of good stuff coming up real soon. So we're bracing ourselves. It's going to be a busy summer. Quick shout out to our Discord server boosters, Opus and the Machine, Gnarls, Aaron K, Tiller the Thriller, Dork the Ninjas, and Doof71. Thanks so much for making sure that we have a great server that everybody can enjoy, and for your contributions to expand our capabilities on Discord. And we really appreciate you for that. For all of our subscribers to both Patreon and Supercast, our top tier subscribers are lore masters. They really do keep the flame alive over here at Lorehounds Central, keeping us in the bits and making sure that we've got all the resources to be able to produce these podcasts. So Samartian, Mark H, Michael G, Michelle E, David W, Brian P, Nick W, SC, Peter OH, Bettina W, Adam S, Nancy M, Duve71, Brian 8063, Frederick H, Sarah L, Gareth C, Eric F, Matthew M, Sarah M, DJ Miwa, Andra B, Kwang Yu, Deadeye Jedi Bob, Nathan T, Alex V, Aaron T, Sub-Zero, Dally V21, Mothership 61, welcome, and Gnarls, and never last, no wait, always last but never least, is Adrian, who is special requested to be always listed last. Thank you, Adrian, for being a moderator and a supporter. Thanks, even if you're not a subscriber. Thank you for listening, because even on the public feed that are ad supported, we see you guys, we see the downloads, and we really appreciate everybody tuning in. And to our subscribers, definitely at any level, we absolutely appreciate you. So we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for swinging by.
The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.